Hello, I'm Jonathan Ashworth, former Labour politician, now a podcaster. But throughout my time in Parliament, I always championed the cause of children of alcoholics. I know how healing it can be to find a fellow thread of fellow feeling. I know how painful it can be to feel alone. And through these conversations, I want to shine a light on experiences too often kept in the shadows. Hello and welcome to COA Lives, a new podcast about children of alcoholics with me, Jonathan Ashworth. And for our first edition, I'm absolutely delighted that a really impressive young woman who's been an advocate for children of alcoholics, who has spoken out in the most amazing terms, is joining me as my guest today, Sarah Drage.
Hello, Jonathan. Thank you for having me.
Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I'm so thrilled to have you here. You, of course, not only are you a podcaster yourself about children of alcoholics, you are somebody who has been directly impacted by this issue.
Yes, I am.
And you've been an advocate. Mm-hmm. You've been recognised for your advocacy and your mental health work, I think, by the BBC. And you've been involved with this charity, Nacoa, which we're both very proud to be associated with. That's the National Association for the Children of Alcoholics. So I'm absolutely delighted to have this opportunity to talk to you today on our new podcast. But let's begin, Sarah, if you're able to tell us, why did you decide to become an advocate for children of alcoholics?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to be one of your first guests, so thank you for that. Why did I start? So I sadly lost my dad, Steve, to alcohol addiction in 2017. And at the time, believe it or not, I didn't realise how bad his addiction had become. I knew there was a problem, but I didn't realise to what extent his addiction had just developed into. 3 days before my dad died, he'd gone into liver failure and he called me. He sounded scared. There was a tone to his voice, and I turned up and he was in bed, shaking, tinge of yellow, and I could see that he needed medical attention. And you know, you've got to bear in mind by this point, I'd lived so many years of my dad telling me I can stop tomorrow. You know, if I wanted to stop drinking, I could stop. So I just thought, okay, this is just another one of those situations. He's drunk. It looks this bad because he's drunk. I told him that I would call an ambulance when I saw him like that. And he shouted at me, told me that, he swore at me, he told me that under no circumstances would he get into an ambulance. He's done this to himself. He'll get over it himself. He didn't want to waste his doctor's time. He didn't believe that he deserved medical attention. He thought that there were other people more worthy of medical care than him. And he really, in that moment, really regained a sense of power over me in the fact that he was so adamant that he wouldn't seek any clinical attention. And I walked away that day and I went shopping. And I just thought, next week, he'll sleep it off, he'll be fine. We'll get him into the Detox program again and he'll be okay. And he did at that point as well. And the reason why I said earlier on that I didn't think it was that bad was because whether he meant to or not, there was always a level of gaslighting there, always a level of, I'm not that bad. Yeah. I don't have a problem. You're being dramatic. So I believed that I was being dramatic. And maybe it's not that bad. And I was so frightened of getting it wrong, you know, and saying to somebody and speaking about him and telling people, you know, my dad's an alcoholic, he needs help. But what if he isn't? What if I'm being dramatic? What if it's really not that bad? So I walked away. I went shopping, and 3 days later I had a phone call from my sister to say, you need to get to the hospital, your dad's in a bad way. And he was in a really bad way. But even then, you're still in denial.
Yeah.
They say alcoholics are in denial about their drinking, but us as a family, we were in denial. We didn't realise how horrendously bad it had gotten. And he very, very quickly deteriorated in that A&E. He went from severity, like he went from majors to resus, from resus to intensive care, to us walking into intensive care, to a team of surgeons and a bedside with covered curtains having that conversation with us. And they told me that he had a 15% of surviving. That's if they didn't die when they put a ventilator onto him. And he didn't make it. And that was a real, I was feeling so many emotions in that moment and that time. And that was a real pivotal moment. And I start with that moment. And I know it's powerful and I know it's probably really triggering for people. But I start with that because that was a moment where I knew I had to do something. I knew that I wanted to make a difference. I didn't know how. Didn't know how I was going to do it because I thought, even at that point, I still told people that he died of a heart attack. Didn't have it in me to tell people that he died from his alcohol addiction. And that is what's listed on his death certificate. It's liver failure is an excessive result of alcohol and decompensated liver failure, excessive alcohol use. So it's listed on his death certificate. That's how he died.
And how old was he?
59, exactly 1 week
no age,
before turning 60.
It's no age at all.
No, it's not. It didn't make his 60th, and that's devastating in itself. But I just remember being in that moment and feeling like I was at a crossroads as well. Like I felt I was already so affected by anxiety because of my dad's drinking, but it manifested as health anxiety. So I've got 2 small children. I've got a husband. I'm all of a sudden in a stable family home. I'm settled. And that felt alien to me. It didn't feel right. So I always felt like something was going to come along. Something was going to ruin it. Something was going to shake this up and it weren't going to last. So I'd already struggled for so many years with that. And I weren't getting help for it because I was so preoccupied and preconceived with the stigma attached to mental health, the stigma attached to being an alcoholic. And that is that crossroads moment that I talk about in the hospital when my dad's on a life support machine. When we switched him off, I knew.
So the machine was switched off?
Yeah, right. I gave the go-ahead for that. My sisters they were just beside themselves.
Are they younger or older than you?
They're younger.
So you're the oldest? So you assume a leadership position naturally as the oldest?
Yeah. And I was the rescuer. It's that hero child. That's how I identify with the type of children of alcoholics, that I was so preoccupied with trying to fix things, trying to rescue. And in that moment when we switched him off, I knew that I had 2 directions to take. I could go down either one road. I knew that if I carried on as I was at the time, by not asking for help, by not seeking support, I'm very much my dad's daughter. I know that. I'm very much my dad's daughter. And I knew that if I would have carried on that way, in 20 years' time, my children would have been standing around my bedside, switching off my life support machine. Or I could learn something from this horrific experience and turn it into something good.
When you say they could have been switching off your life support machine, is this because you were drinking too much?
I wouldn't say, so I don't identify myself as having a problem with drink, but before my dad died, I would say I was in a little bit of a slippery slope to relying on it.
Yeah.
I'd come back from work and mummy wine culture was huge, or is huge still, but back then it was justified. If I'd had a long day at work and come home and looked after the kids, look forward to a glass of wine, and it relaxed me.
Yeah.
And I used it as an escape to get to sleep at night, coupled with a few painkillers.
Really?
So I knew that made me feel good. And there was that euphoric feeling that come with it that would just tone down the anxiety and just numb it out. And I weren't getting help for my mental health. I'd had a few sessions with a therapist and thought it doesn't work for me. And I know absolutely now that is not the case. It doesn't work like that. But at the time, You know, you're so preoccupied with, well, I can't possibly be vulnerable. I can't possibly speak about this because what will people think of me?
This is so fascinating, and I think a lot of the listeners will so identify with this story. It's a very similar story to mine, actually. My own dad died from his drinking, but refused to deal with it. And of course, you have this whole complex mix of emotions. You're upset because you love your dad, but you also find his drunken episodes, I guess, boring, tedious. He's drunk again. Why do I have to put up with this? It makes you angry. I can totally identify with you walking away and going shopping because you just think it's another one of their times when they're just out of it and you can't be bothered dealing with it because you're so sick of dealing it throughout your life. I mean, when do you think you first noticed the drinking? Were you a child, or was it when you were a teenager? And did it get worse throughout your childhood years?
It definitely got progressively worse. I used to identify my dad's drinking as a child, and I didn't realise it was drinking at the time. But I used to say to him, can you just act normal? What I didn't realise as a child, what I was basically saying to him was, can you just be sober? But I associated different tones of his voice, different behaviours, different patterns of behaviour with a different character that weren't my dad. And then there was my dad when he was sober, who was completely different. It was this loving, fun, reliable, amazing human being who I absolutely adored. I really hated him when he was drunk. And as I got older, I put two and two together and realised, well, actually, you only get like this version of yourself when you've been drinking. But again, as a child, you really look up to your parent. You believe what they tell you. And he kept telling me that he could stop Monday and he weren't an alcoholic. And that was his thing that he did to relax. And everybody's allowed something to relax.
Did he drink every day?
Yeah.
What did he drink?
It started off with like really weak lagers, cider.
Yeah.
Towards the end of his life, he was consuming a litre of vodka a day that we knew of.
A litre of vodka?
That we knew of. But we found it buried in the garden, empty bottles. We found empty bottles behind the bathtub.
So he knew he had a problem and he was trying to hide it from you all?
Yeah.
But he didn't know how to deal with his problem?
No. My dad was a Yorkshireman. So we had this real stiff upper lip. He was a real proud, stoic man. Admitting that he had a problem was just, he wouldn't have done.
But you mentioned earlier about Detox. Did you get him into Detox at times?
Yeah. So he had 16 months of sobriety that he was forced into. So we got to the point, this was about 2 years before he died. He had an episode where he was vomiting blood, he was bloated, he was going yellow, he was delirious. And I said to him, I feel like I'd used so many tactics to try and like submit him into Detox or help. And I said to him one day, Dad, if you don't get help or admit that you have a problem, then I don't want to see you anymore and the kids won't be seeing you. And I knew that me and my sisters and my daughters were my dad's world, like his world revolved around us. And he used to say to us a lot that I drink to forget, and if it weren't for you girls, I wouldn't be here.
So he was a loving father?
Oh, he loved us, absolutely adored us, really loved us. And I said to him, if you don't stop, then we're not going to see you until you admit you have a problem.
And that's what makes it so much more heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Because, of course, nobody wants to lose their dad in these circumstances. But if you know that your dad is loving, like my dad was loving, it is so much more frustrating that they won't seek help, or you cannot help them with this problem, with this addiction. I mean, my dad was never violent. There was never any issues in our home. Sadly, that's not the experience of everybody who grows up with an alcoholic parent. Quite the opposite in many circumstances. And in some ways, I guess, I mean, look, nobody wants to have a violent parent, of course not, or a parent who behaves in even more heinous ways. But if you run away from that, it's totally understandable, and nobody would blame that individual for running away from that. But when your parent is loving and yet they're still getting drunk all the time, I think it has a different type of emotional impact.
Well, it's massively confusing.
Yeah.
Because one moment you really despise them, you hate them. I wished my dad dead. I wished him dead week before he died on the phone.
Really?
I told him I hated him and you'd be better off dead.
Because of his drinking?
Yeah. I was so frustrated. I was so angry.
The frustration that he wouldn't do anything to
Yeah,
do
like I thought, Dad, you've had 16 months of sobriety and you've relapsed. Why? Why have you done this? And I was so angry because I'd had 16 months to connect with him, to love him as that father and have him back to normal, the dad that I remembered as a little girl. And then he'd ruined it by drinking again. And I was so angry, like I cannot describe. And I think people listening to this will relate. There's a level of frustration there that is really difficult to articulate because it is such an all-consuming frustration. And you're absolutely right. When you know what they're like without the drink, when you know what they're like sober, you know their personality, you know their character, you know they're a good person. And then when they drink, they're this opposite version of that. And one minute you love them and the next you hate them. The next you love them and then you hate them. And it's a constant yo-yo of emotions. And I was relieved when he died as well at one point. So there's the conflicting emotions are huge. It's a really difficult process to get your head around.
What were Christmases like? What was birthdays like for you?
Unpredictable. I never knew what version of him I was getting. I remember my 21st birthday party and he was drunk and I was so angry at him. Just act normal. Again, that act normal. What I was saying to him was act sober. Just be sober.
Yeah.
When I got married, I begged him to walk me down the aisle at least before he had a drink. If you turn up to my wedding drunk, I'll never talk to you again. Gave him ultimatums. And he did really well on my wedding day, like so well. And it would have been so incredibly difficult for him because my dad was physically dependent. He was physically dependent on alcohol. He needed that, like we needed water to survive. And he managed to get through the day, deliver a speech, really moderate his drinking throughout the day. And he did really well. But special occasions were very unpredictable. And it brings around a level of anxiety within you, or within me especially, that I never knew what version I was getting. I never knew how the day was going to pan out. Could I enjoy it without worrying about my dad's behaviour?
And growing up, did your friends see this? Did they comment on it? Was it embarrassing with your school friends?
I used to hide a lot of it. A lot of my school friends have reached out to me since I've been on this journey of advocacy and said, I had no idea. I would never have known. And some have said, yeah, we kind of guessed. But I did, at every opportunity, try and hide it as much as possible.
Yeah.
You know, I was really obsessed with being perfect. And we already lost everything through my dad's drinking. We'd gone from living in a really privileged home, a privileged lifestyle, to then all of a sudden being catapulted into this world of poverty, living on a council estate. At the time where Shameless was really popular, you remember that TV programme?
Manchester based. Yeah. I'm a Mancunian, I know Shameless.
So that was a really popular series at the time. So it's 2005 and I'm living on a council estate with an alcoholic dad. You can imagine the stigma and you can imagine the comments and what used to come back to me. So I would avoid, where possible, bringing friends back to my house.
Really?
Would avoid it. And I was so preoccupied with outwardly projecting this image of myself, do really well at school, make my dad proud, go to university, study, get an education. And I was really interested in performing arts and I was really good at it. I was a really good singer, a really good actress. And I stopped doing it because I thought I needed to get a proper job and I needed to bring in an income, make some money, help fix my dad, help rescue my dad. And I lost that part of me. My identity became the daughter of an alcoholic.
Well, let's talk about that a a bit more on your identity. Because you said in the hospital where you were faced with this absolutely extraordinary and quite traumatic decision, which I cannot imagine ever putting myself through. I mean, I just got a phone call from Thailand telling me that my dad had died. And I remember saying, well, you know, what of? Even though I knew what of in my bones. And the person at the end of the phone said, you do realise your dad was an alcoholic? It was drink. And I was like, yeah, of course I knew that, I suppose. I remember that hit me in my stomach. Like, what a punch in the belly that was. An absolute smack. But you had to make that awful decision in the hospital. You are assuming this leadership role as the oldest sister. But at that moment, you make a decision about the direction of your own life, and I'll maybe come more to that at the end. But you since then have thrown yourself in to advocacy on behalf of children of alcoholics. And that's not just, you know, children at school, that's adults whose parents had alcohol problems who are still processing that trauma today. You've done I think a TED talk as well. You've been recognised and won these awards. So just tell us a little bit of how you got into that. I know you do a lot of social media. You're a social media influencer as well, I would argue. So tell us then, you walked out of that hospital and you decided you were going to do something. You were going to speak out. You needed to put in place support, advocacy, platforms for other children and young adults so they knew that they didn't have to suffer in silence. So just talk us through that.
So when I made that decision after we switched off his life support machine, at the time I knew that I needed to do something, but I didn't know what. So it was after a couple of years after we'd lost my dad and processing the grief and riding the emotional roller coaster that comes with it, I realised that people don't talk about alcohol addiction as much as they should, and now we do more now, but 5-6 years ago we didn't, especially the child's perspective or the loved one's perspective, and I knew that needed to change, and I wanted to draw light on that. So I did have a conversation with my mum and my sisters and said, you know, this is something I'd really like to start talking about. It's something I'd like to start campaigning about, sharing our story so that other people don't feel like they're so alone. Because when you're in that moment and you're growing up in that family environment, you feel incredibly isolated. You feel that nobody would understand this. Nobody gets this. We can't talk about it because I don't want to disrespect my dad, or I don't want to be disloyal by talking to people about it. And it was like this moment of just pure liberation over it, I suppose, where I thought, actually, I am going to talk about it. And this is my story to tell as well. I was equally affected. And we need to talk about it. We can't brush it under the carpet and pretend it doesn't happen, because it does. You know, there's 1 in 5 children that are affected by a parent's drinking. I believe 1 in 3 adults are affected by loved ones drinking. So there are millions of people that are affected by this. And very few people feel that they can speak out so openly about it. And at first, I believed stigma to be the culprit of why people didn't talk about it. So I became so obsessed almost with destigmatizing mental health and alcohol addiction. And I went on this huge advocacy campaigning journey. I did a TED talk, I set up a charity, I set up community groups, I talked in the press, I talked in the news. I was lambed to the slaughter with a lot of headlines around being that child of an alcoholic.
Tell us a bit more. How do you mean? What happened?
So a lot of the press that I've done has been really lovely, and they've been handled really sensitively. But there's been a few articles out there. I think that one of the headlines is "Woman went shopping whilst dad lay dying of alcohol addiction."
Really? That's unbelievable.
Yeah, that was the headline. But Nacoa got mentioned, so I kind of took the win with it. I thought,
well, that's very.
Do you know what? Like,
well, you can. Well, if you can take it on the chin in that way, I commend you. A lot of people, I think, would be very upset and furious that
it's not a nice headline, is it?
That it was characterised in that way.
No, it's clickbait, and I suppose I get it. I do get it, but my life became so preoccupied with advocacy.
Yeah.
And as amazing as it was, and I got a lot of recognition. In 1 year, I won 3 awards.
Wow.
One with the BBC, one with the Mind charity, and one with our local Kent's wellbeing team. So, and that was within the space of 3 months.
And what is your message when you're advocating? What is it you're saying about stigma? What is summarise your TED Talk in 30 seconds.
My TED Talk. Oh God.
Is it still available online?
It is still available online. Yeah, it's still there.
When did you do it?
A lot of it I changed though, actually. A lot of it I would change.
Really?
I did it in 22.
Right.
21 or 22. Stigma kills.
Yeah.
That's my message. Stigma kills. Shame and stigma kill people because it prevents people from accessing support. It prevents people from admitting that they need help.
Yeah.
It prevents people from talking about it, reaching out to community. My overriding message in all of this is stigma kills. And, people drink for a reason. My dad used to say, I drink to forget. He had anxiety, he had depression, he had PTSD. He was drinking to feel good. He was drinking to escape and to numb something. And when we don't have the empowerment or the resources or the vocabulary to articulate what we're going through and how we feel and feel that nobody's listening because people are going to shame or judge or talk about you for talking about it, then that's quite a deadly, in my opinion, it's quite deadly.
And when I spoke about my dad, and I spoke about him in Parliament when I was an MP on a clip which got huge following on social media, which you were looking at just earlier, in fact, I got a lot of comment, a lot of people thanking me for speaking out, because there's so many people out there, hopefully, who are listening to this podcast who don't feel they can speak out themselves, but just feel reassured and comforted and are given strength and succour by the fact that people like us speak out. But I also felt very guilty because I felt I was betraying his memory, besmirching his reputation somehow, washing my dirty linen in public, if you like. I think in some ways it was easy for me because I was an only child. I don't have brothers or sisters. I just wonder, you said you had the support of your sisters and your mum, but I mean, did you really? Have you ever felt that sense of guilt that you're talking about somebody else in arguably negative terms?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah. And how do you process that guilt?
I weigh it up with the good that comes from it. And I look at, when my dad died, we did get a lot of comments about how he did it to himself and he only had himself to blame. So I kind of felt like I was going on a journey to repent for him and kind of show people that, there's a bigger picture to this. So when I do feel guilty, I look at the bigger picture and I look at the good that's come from it. And I think, if I was advocating for any other illness that my dad had died from, if I was advocating for, if he died from a heart attack or a stroke, and I was campaigning and doing charity work for a stroke charity or a heart foundation, then I would get a lot more support. Nobody would ask me if I felt guilty about that. And I look at addiction as an illness. I mean, my dad had a mental health disorder and he used alcohol to cope with it. And I think a lot of people do that. And because of the stigma associated with it, we can sometimes get caught up with this belief that, we shouldn't be talking about this. We're affecting their reputation. And I do think that, but then I think that's where the stigma kind of takes a hold of me. But if it was any other illness, I wouldn't worry about it. And I think with this, so many people are affected. And I genuinely believe, I mean, at the time, if my dad was alive, he'd hate me talking about it. But I believe that if he could see the good coming from this and the thousands of messages that I've had from people and the people that it's inspired to get help and support, then I think that's a good thing that has come from this. So that's what I remember.
Your sisters are okay with it?
They've never said anything to me.
Mm.
And we've had conversations around what I do, and they're really supportive of it. So they'd come to events with me, or they'd share things on social media, but they won't talk about it themselves.
And can I put to you a slightly counter or contrary view? And I put this because I've had this from my friends, like good friends of mine, who have obviously been supportive of me when I spoke about my dad, because they know they understand the trauma, and they can see what I've gone through. But I've also had friends put to me, and they put this to me from the best of intentions.
Yeah.
They also say to me, look, if your dad wasn't happy, and if you only get one life, if that's what made him happy, the drinking, in my dad's case, all right, he died at 60,
Yeah.
Similar to your 60, it was actually not far off his 61st birthday. He died at 60 when I was about 32. But people say to me, look, if he was happy, he went happy. And I think my dad probably was happy drinking so much. So upsetting for me.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean, though? Some people do put that as a counter.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, my opinions, and I said to you earlier on about my TED Talk, I'd probably change some of it.
Yeah.
My opinions around addiction have changed. I used to be so resentful of alcohol. I used to blame it. I'd avoid it when he died.
Yeah.
And I used to blame it was just alcohol.
Yeah.
But actually, my dad weren't happy when he was drinking.
Yeah.
And that's the difference with this. But it didn't just have to be alcohol. It could have been anything. We can be addicted to a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I think it runs deeper, doesn't it? So for a lot of people, it's not so much about the substance, it's about what you're numbing.
Yeah.
What are you running from? And now I look at it very differently.
Yeah.
I do look at it differently.
So the theme of this first edition is the price of advocacy. And do you think you've paid a heavy price for the advocacy work that you've been doing? You've mentioned those awful headlines that you've generated, and whoever that journalist was writing that, what an absolute sod. I have to use stronger words if it wasn't a family podcast. They are. I mean, do you feel you've paid a heavy price?
Yes,
yeah,
I do. And that was recently shown to me in a recent therapy session. I'll tell you what my therapist said to me. She said, Sarah, who are you without the identity of your dad? I just cried. It makes me emotional now.
But you have got an identity. You're incredibly successful in your career. You've been recognised for your advocacy work, but you are recognised in your own right for the work that you do as a professional person.
Thank you.
You are successful.
But
you've
feels though that it was
family
all
and
driven
home
by my dad. All the work that I do now has been influenced or triggered by my dad's drinking. And I used to really love performing arts, and I stopped. I put that down. And when I put that down and stopped doing it, I lost something that was for me and threw myself into something where and there's an irony to this, I was the rescuer when my dad was alive, and I continue to be the rescuer even in his death, like advocating and trying to protect his memory and his legacy by rescuing his reputation, by advocating and campaigning. And as much as I wouldn't change it and I will still carry on doing it, I still have to find something for myself, to do for myself, and getting back into performing arts and picking up the microphone again. And
well, you're a successful podcaster, so that is a performance.
There's that, but just having that for myself, for something where I don't have to talk about my dad all the time, or I don't have to think about him all the time, because my big part of my work, even the charity work that I do as a consultant, I wouldn't have been in that role had I not set up my own charity, which was influenced by my dad.
Yeah.
So everything, the direction my life has taken has been at the foundation of my dad.
I think sometimes when you go through these awful traumatic experiences, you want to put yourself into a bit like one of those cannons that you get in the circus.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you get fired out of a cannon and
Yeah.
you're just fired off the earth into a different sort of environment. And I understand that I've had those feelings both related to my dad and, funnily enough, to a little, you know, when I lost my parliamentary seat last year unexpectedly, which is obviously has an emotional impact in itself. So I wanted that feeling of just shoot me off or put me in a rocket and send me somewhere else. But your experiences colour the individual, your personality now, and give you your thoughts and insights. And obviously, those experiences have helped create you, who's clearly a phenomenal personality, who has achieved and is achieving so much.
Thank you. Do you know, I am the woman I am today because of those experiences.
Yeah.
And there's actually a lot of good that's come out of it. I think we talk about the bad, but there is a lot of good that's come from it. You know, I'm a very resilient individual.
Yeah.
I'm very good at being in pressurized environments. I'm very open-minded, so I can look at things from a real open lens rather than looking at everything black and white. I'm very good at asking questions, asking why. And that's really served me really well going into adulthood. I'm able to view my parenting style differently, looking at, okay, what didn't work for me growing up and what can I do differently for my children to ensure that they don't have similar problems to me.
I mean, I do think growing up in our circumstances gives us a resilience.
It does, yeah.
Although I remember once I got myself, when I was a politician, politicians by our nature, we say controversial things because, that's the nature of a politician. I remember somebody who was very disagreed with me politically. They were much more of the sort of, this person was much of like a sort of Jeremy Corbyn type supporter, and I'm from the different section of the Labour Party. I remember once they put on my Facebook page, well, about me, and this person was a mental health nurse, by the way.
Oh,
she
God.
put on my face, well, John Ashworth, he's a child of an alcoholic, so he's bound to be damaged and say things like this. And that was actually coming from a mental health nurse.
Wow.
Somebody works in the NHS at the local mental health partnership trust. I couldn't believe it. I actually think it gives us a resilience. I just want to come to in a sort of final sort of question. I've got two questions. You said, I just want to pick up on this a little for a second. You said you also had to make a choice about your own behaviour, that you could be there in 20 years, lying on that hospital bed, hooked to a machine. I suppose my first question is, do you think this is genetic? You've obviously thought a lot about this issue. You've researched a lot of this issue. Is there something in our genes? Because I often ask myself that about my own dad. And I suppose the second question is, you're a mum, you clearly absolutely adore your two daughters as any mum would, and that's absolutely right, and I adore my own daughters as well. Do you think about how you behave towards them? How does it impact your parenting? And how do you try and do things to give them what you didn't have?
That's a really good question. So your first question, I'm not sure whether it's genetic. And I know there's a lot of arguments for and against. And so I sit on the fence with it. But what I will say is that addiction did run in my family on my dad's side. And when I did our family tree, I went as far back as, I think I went back to the 18th century, and I saw old prison records for a great-grandfather for drunken, disorderly behaviour.
Right.
So there is a pattern.
Yeah.
There is a pattern. And I won't say what other family members along that side, but when I look into it, I think, okay, there's a pattern here. Or is it learnt behaviour? Have I watched my dad turn to something to numb out pain, trauma? I'm not quite sure. I'm still on the fence with it. But looking at my lineage and my family tree, I would say that actually you could argue that this is a genetic issue. But there's also neurodiversity that runs, and I was recently diagnosed with ADHD, and I know that doesn't cause alcohol addiction, but it makes you more predisposed to it because we're brought up in an environment and in a world that isn't equipped for people with our brain types. So when you're always running and your brain's 24/7 thinking all the time and you're here, there and everywhere with ADHD, sometimes having that little something to help relax you and to stop those thoughts running out of control it is helpful. It does help. And I'm very much like my dad. My dad was very much like that. And he was never diagnosed, but I can look back now and think we share a lot of traits.
Right.
So, but that leads me on nicely to the second question about my children. It's that it has taught me, this whole experience has taught me that we are all individual. Our needs are all individual. We all process things very differently. We all see things very differently from different perspectives. And it's really supported the way I parent my children. We're really open in our family. So I lived my childhood being denied of a reality. I knew something bad was happening, but I was always told, you're being dramatic. It's not that bad. And that had an issue on me as a woman in that I would become so dependent on other people's opinions because I didn't trust my own decision making, because I'd lived and been brought up not to trust my own judgment. So as a parent now, if I'm arguing with my husband, which we do, like couples argue naturally, I won't tell my girls we're not arguing, everything's fine. I won't sit there if I'm crying about something and say, no, I'm fine. I won't lie to them or gaslight them. If they ask me how Granddad Steve died, I'll tell them in a child-friendly way. And we have a conversation around how important it is to talk about mental health and how we feel. I don't view mental health as a weakness. I don't view vulnerability as a weakness. I actually feel it's a strength. So I'm very conscious of bringing up my girls to be vulnerable and strong about it, to own when they're upset, to own when they can't do something or when they need help. Because I've seen the damaging consequences of not. I've seen how deadly it is to deny how we feel and to brush things under the carpet. So we're a very open family. And that does actually, for us, I've seen the positives of that. My girls are confident. My girls can get up on stage, they can sing, they can deliver talks. They're really confident around people. They're confident with their learning. And they're confident to know their own opinions. And another thing, which my husband and I have been really big on lately, is apologising to them when we've done wrong. Because we're not going to be perfect parents all the time. And I've learnt that actually, if I get it wrong sometimes, which I do, I can say to my kids, I'm sorry, I will do better next time. I didn't mean to do it like that, or I didn't mean that. And that in itself is really quite empowering because my girls can see that as an example, to own when you've done something wrong, to apologise for it, and to accept that you're not always going to get things perfect and to get everything right. And I chalk a lot of that up to my dad. So yeah, there's a lot actually that I'm grateful for. I actually think, and I'll end with this, my dad's death saved me. And I genuinely believe that because I learned a lot from what he went through and how it ended. And I believe that he saved my life. And I believe that if he knew that when he was alive, he'd have died 10 times over. So that is what I truly, truly believe. And every day I'm thankful and grateful to him for that.
Well, Sarah, you said your dad would hate you speaking out, but I think your dad, Steve, would be very proud of you.
Thank you.
So, Sarah Drage, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.